Is it okay to be a conservative and be against the death penalty? That's the topic today. In studio, we have Brett Farley, who is the director of the brand new Oklahoma Conservatives Concerned About the Death Penalty. I'm Andrew Spino on special assignment with Project 46. Joining us now, Brett Farley with Conservatives Against the Death Penalty. Now, this organization, I think, has been around a while, but new to Oklahoma. So tell us, Brett, tell us about yourself and tell us about this organization.
Sure. Well, I've been in the political space for my entire adult life, and I've been passionate about this issue, particularly when in college I attended a debate and realized that I had no idea what I was talking about when I was pro-death penalty, and decided to dig into the issue and realize that no, I'm actually against the death penalty. And so fast forward decades later, I've gotten involved with the Catholic Church and politics and been instrumental in establishing Oklahoma conservatives concerned about the death penalty.
Okay. And how would you describe yourself politically?
I'm traditionally conservative. Grew up as a Southern Baptist before I converted to the Catholic Church. I've been very involved in the Republican Party of Oklahoma historically, and I've always loved making conservative arguments and advancing conservative values in Oklahoma.
And I think in a lot of people's minds, conservative and against the death penalty,
they tend not to equate. Yeah, and one of the principal aims of our organization is to make the argument that opposition to the death penalty is actually a conservative position.
Well, let's hear it.
In a lot of respects. Well, I mean, first and foremost, conservatives believe in the sanctity of life. All life, not just life in the womb, but all life. And so that's why, as the executive director for the Catholic Conference of Oklahoma, we advance protections for the unborn, we advance protections for the elderly, and we advance protections for those that are incarcerated and on death row. Because at the end of the day, if we believe that God has created us all equally with the sanctity of life, then that needs to be protected in every instance, not just in a few.
And I mean, Scripture commands us to consider and visit the people.
It's a corporal work of mercy.
Yeah. That these are people not put away behind bars simply to be forgotten.
Right.
That's not the directive. I'm not a theologian, not to get too deeply into it, but operating under the banner, Conservatives Against the Death Penalty, what kind of response do you get from Republican lawmakers who you approach?
We get all kinds of responses. I think one of the most frequent responses is kind of sort of a head scratching. This doesn't compute.
Right.
You're conservative, but you're opposed to death penalty.
Those don't go
because
together.
Traditionally, it's sort of just expected that you're supposed to be pro-death penalty.
It was like when I worked on criminal justice reform. Mm-hmm. It took a while to get conservative and criminal justice reform to come together. Right. So I empathize with your plight. Go ahead.
And I think, one of the more surprising things is the lack of opposition we get. We get the head scratching, and then there's an openness to the dialogue, because in most cases, legislators and other civic leaders just haven't really thought through this. They haven't thought through the life aspects, the fiscal aspects, the criminal justice aspects in terms of the lack of a deterrent, things of those nature. That they just haven't thought these things through. Parsed out the details. When we lay these things out for them, then you can sort of see the wheels turning. They're starting to reconsider this issue again in a way that they've never thought about it before.
Have you been surprised at all by, let me ask if this has happened, and then to what degree, if at all, approaching a well-known conservative Republican and finding out that person is already opposed to the death penalty?
Right.
Is this, I am a conservative opposed to the death penalty also, and I know I'm not alone. Is it growing? Has it always been there? Yeah. What's the dynamic?
It is growing. To your first point, there are a surprising number of leaders that I would say are not comfortable publicly stating their opposition to the death penalty yet, but have told me privately that they have for some time at least had some serious questions, if not completely opposed altogether. And so there is I would say, a groundswell coming amongst influential conservative leaders in Oklahoma. And that's one of our primary goals, is to sort of coalesce these folks together so they can eyeball each other in a public forum and go, okay, there are a lot of us here. It's okay to talk about this publicly. It's okay to publicly question the death penalty. We're not going to lose an election. We're not going to get our heads lopped off publicly. We're not going to get criticized if we question this thing.
Permission to revisit this.
It's quite all right to consider these things. It has historically been a third rail, and it's an uncomfortable thing to do.
How do you make the case? Before we went on, we were talking about the Scott Eisenberg case. He's the next one up for execution in Oklahoma. If anyone deserves to be executed, it's probably this guy. Sure. He went on a rampage of murder with no regard for human life whatsoever.
Right.
Ruined many, many lives along the way. How do you make the case to someone who is pro-death penalty, who you're trying to convince? How do you convince them to give Scott Eisenberg a pass?
Well, I think the first argument to be made is, at the end of the day, when we dig deep into the issue and the motivations behind the death penalty, what you find ultimately that the only thing that remains is this motivation of retribution, that we've got to visit upon these folks that have committed egregious crimes, some sort of reciprocity, some sort of payment for what they've done. The problem is that when you ask the inmate themselves what they least want is life in prison. And in many cases, what they're asking for is the death penalty. It's a sense of mercy for them. So if we're really talking about retribution and justice, the just thing to do is to keep them in prison and give them an opportunity to really consider what they did, and perhaps possibly even have an opportunity for redemption. If we're true to our nature as a red state, as a faithful Christian society here, then what we ought to do is follow what Christ said, which is to offer mercy and redemption. Nobody has an opportunity for that if they're dead. And so to be true to our faith, to be true to what we believe in justice, is to leave that person incarcerated.
Okay. And what you're talking about is more, philosophical.
Right.
Opposition to the death penalty. Let's talk about practical application.
Sure.
Do you think that the justice system is fair enough to guarantee that Oklahoma is not going to execute an innocent person?
There are 10 individuals on the list of exonerees that would argue, no, it's not just, who have gone through the system and exhausted their appeals, and yet after millions of dollars being spent by the state of Oklahoma trying to prove their guilt, ultimately were found to be innocent. Those 10 individuals and well over 100 across the country would argue that it's not just. And if we're talking about the racial aspect of justice, it's even more unjust, because the disparity amongst the ethnicities and those that are convicted of capital crimes is inarguable. The minorities are convicted of capital crimes in far greater degree than white folks. And that's just unjust, plain and simple. So the possibility that someone can get a fair shake in our current system is very, very low. And so if we're going to be a society that promotes justice, then it's either justice or it's not. You can't have justice halfway or three quarters. If we're convicting someone wrongfully, a single person, then the system's broken. And the question has been asked publicly many times by our friend Adam Luck, for instance, who asks all the time, what number are you willing to put on this? How many people are you willing to wrongfully convict and put to death in order to continue justifying the system? If your number is 0, then you're opposed to the death penalty.
It's a very good question. Yeah. Let's talk about the Pardon and Parole Board, and let's talk about legislation that you have your eye on for the next session in 2023. We're going to get into that. Brett Farley with Conservatives Against the Death Penalty is in studio. We're going to be right back. Here at Project 46, we are trying to hook up conservative consumers with conservative business owners, and we're succeeding. So if you'd like to sponsor this show or any one of the great shows on Project 46, just click on the link in the description below.